Hello, I'm Alec Kerr, and I am with...
Tranifer Lovely.
And we've known each other for more than a decade
More
now.
than a decade, 2007, I think.
Something
so
like
hot
that.
second,
Yeah.
second, yeah.
And you actually were my original co-host with Lost in Movies, which we
Yes.
now do here.
Nice, yeah.
And you were in my wedding, but it's Pride Month, and you are very proudly queer.
Yes.
So I thought it might be nice to have you share your story, because the more stories that are shared, the more awareness of that
Yeah,
is.
and the more normalized for
Right.
The youngsters and stuff.
Right.
It's good to have older representation for them to understand.
So how do you identify?
I identify as a non-binary queer person. So just kind of queer across the board, gender queer, sexually queer, just...
Okay. So how would you define non-binary?
So non-binary is when you fall outside of the binary of male or female gender. So you could be both, you could be neither, you can be a nice mixture of the two, depending on the day. It's just, basically anything that doesn't fall into male or female.
And you would think that's not very confusing, but it kind of is for a lot of people, because so much of society is put into that binary.
Exactly,
and that black and white. And so if you dress one day in a feminine way, it's like, oh, well, how are you not female?
Exactly.
And if you dress in a masculine way, it's like, well, how are you not masculine?
Exactly.
It's like, well, it can differ from day to day.
Exactly, and it confuses people when one day I'm wearing a ball gown, a little mini ball gown, and then the next day I'm dressed like a teenage boy.
Yeah.
It varies, you know, it depends on the mood.
So when did you start realizing that you didn't really fit into traditional ideas?
So as a very young child, I always liked the term tomboy, even though it didn't fit with me. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm a tomboy, because I just liked the emphasis on boy.
Right.
And it was kind of the same thing. My whole childhood, I would identify with the male characters or like the kind of ambiguous characters, like the villains a lot. I really liked the villains, which now as an adult, I've learned have all been queer-coded in Disney movies. I'm like, oh, okay. So that was really cool. But gosh, like earliest memories, it just didn't fit. And something was off.
So around what year did you start saying, I don't think I am
In the binary?
in the binary?
2005.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in ninth grade, and this group, Portland Outright, came and did a representation at my high school and just kind of did a workshop for who was interested. And they started talking about various genders, and it was like, oh, that's an option. And before that, I just was not aware that that was a thing, because there wasn't really a lot of representation back then. I think the term non-binary wasn't coined until, I want to say 2004 or 2006 or something. It was like, I was right in the middle of that,
Right.
so I wasn't aware of that term until years later.
Right. And so the whole idea of discussing your pronouns wasn't even a thing, I feel like, until fairly recently.
Yeah, I wasn't even aware of like, oh, once again, that's an option until, gosh, I was probably like 23 or 24 before that made sense to me, and I was aware of it and met someone else who used gender-neutral pronouns.
Right, because when we first met, you certainly weren't saying, oh, my pronouns are they, them.
Right.
And so I've been trying to retrain myself, because I keep accidentally saying she, and I'm like, or her, and I'm like, well, no, that's incorrect.
And it's, you know, you learn to do better, and you do better over time. And it's the effort more than the being correct, I think. It's the people, because then there's people who are defiant just to be mean.
Yeah, they're just being malicious.
Exactly. So as long as it's not done in malice, I don't see a problem with it, at least personally for me.
Right. And it's hard, as I said, if you knew somebody as a certain way, it can be hard to retrain your brain.
Exactly, yeah. Like my mom, she tries, you know, my younger sibling's actually non-binary as well. My mom just, half of her kids turned out queer and non-binary. She's like, I don't, maybe she ate a lot of pizza as a kid. Just kidding. But yeah, so she has done the best she can. So but it was so cute. Like she was like, I wasn't aware you're a they, them. It's like, she's trying. Yeah, but it's cute with the boomers that make an effort.
Yeah, so we both grew up in rural Maine, so I can relate to the experience of not really fitting into a certain box. So how was it being in rural Maine, trying to explain that you're not really a certain gender, you're not really fitting into sexuality as most people
Right.
do?
Right. So I came out as queer in 2003. So it was a couple of years before I realized that I was, I believe I called it intergender at the time, because once again, there wasn't really the terminology. Yeah, there was intergender, gender fluid, and that was pretty much it that I was aware of, at least. Yeah, it was rough. I went to a public school in my area, and people were not nice about it. I ended up transferring to a smaller school in New Hampshire, actually, and shockingly, people were worse, because at least in the public school, even though everyone was really, I shouldn't say everyone was awful. The people who were awful were very vocal. But at least at that school, it was 500 students versus 50 students, so I could fade into the backdrop.
Right.
Whereas one is like a tiny building, tiny student body. So the ones that were cruel were constantly cruel.
Right. And there was a higher percentage of those cruel
Exactly,
people.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Right. And so you have chosen your own name.
Yes.
When did you do that?
Also around the same time, probably 2004, 2005. But it's funny because my birth name, I hated my whole life. So I was constantly changing it, and I would do like masculine and feminine names and stuff. And yeah. So like I really liked My Little Pony, so I went from like Rainbow to Red the horse, which is just a character I made up, and Felix the cat was one I wanted to go by for a while.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That's a good one. Yeah, I almost did Felix, but yeah. So then, as I got older, I was like able to discover myself and figure out what worked for me. Yeah.
So what was the origin specifically of Tranifer? Because I looked into it. You're the
There's
only
no,
Tranifer.
I'm the only one in the world. So I picked Tran based off of a book character that I really enjoyed around that era, in a book by, I actually don't remember what he has gone by. Ironically, that author is now out as transgender, which I wasn't aware of at the time. He didn't come out until probably 20 years after the book was written. So that was kind of cool. Which I just recently discovered. But I liked this book character, so I went by Tran for a long time. And then a couple years later in high school, my best friend just jokingly started adding the ifer to the end, and it stuck. And it just kind of has fit ever since then.
Now, do you ever encounter any confusion, since Tran does mean a very specific thing
Yes.
now? That you're non-binary, but you're not transgender. Does that ever?
So actually, fun fact about transgender is it actually covers the entire. It's an umbrella term, basically, for anybody that does not identify as cisgender, which is the gender that you were assigned at birth, or the sex you were assigned at birth. So it does include non-binary people and genderqueer people and all of that. It's actually, once again, a common misconception because people think trans means transition genders, and it actually means transcend, where you're outside of that. Yeah, that's like a really cool thing that a lot of people don't know. But yes, it did cause a lot of confusion, which actually made people like not want to call me that for a long time, because they're like, it seems inappropriate because you're announcing your gender. And I'm like, no, it's just, I didn't even, like, I picked the name before I even realized, and then right after I realized.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And how would you define your sexuality?
Also queer. So I am not attracted to men, but I am attracted to other non-binary people and women.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you were with somebody who was, or at least could be seen as male.
Yeah.
Did that cause confusion?
Yes, caused a lot of confusion. And we got in that relationship when I was 17 and going through some things, and we were together for over a decade, but there was a lot of self-confusion as well as perceived confusion. There was a lot of complicated stuff with that. But since that ended, it's been a lot more self-discovery, and I've felt more comfortable filling that space and being in more queer spaces without having imposter syndrome.
Right.
Because though there is a lot of hatred in the bisexual and pansexual community for people that, date the opposite sex or gender. Yeah, but I finally feel more comfortable being me.
Because I've talked to people that said that they, like you said, they're treated poorly, like, oh, you're a traitor to being queer.
Exactly.
If you are with...
Exactly. And it's one of those things that's difficult, especially growing up in rural Maine, because statistically, how many other queer people do you have in the dating pool, you know? So a lot of the time, it's very common for bisexual women to end up with men.
Right.
Which is, if that's your thing, that's fine. It's
Yeah.
just not really my thing.
Right. And then you have the whole, oh, well, especially with people who are bisexual, oh, it's just a phase. You're gonna get the girl out of your system.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's an interview I saw like a while ago with Anna Paquin who said, yeah, I'm still bisexual even though I'm married and I have kids.
Exactly.
Because if we broke up, I would be still attracted to both men and women.
Exactly.
And so I could wind up with a woman. So I am still bisexual even though I am with a man.
Exactly. There's actually a fun anecdote that you're like a bed couch. So if you're in bed form, you're a bed. If you're in couch form, you're a couch. But you're still going to be a bed couch regardless.
Right.
And it's kind of the same thing, And also the thing with bisexual is a lot of people think that it's a 50-50, but it's just any attraction to the opposite gender. So you could be a little bisexual or, but then there's people who prefer the same sex, but they still have a little bit of attraction to the opposite sex.
Right. And it's the same with non-binary. It
Exactly.
shifts back and forth. It's not one or the other.
Exactly. And it definitely makes it complicated when I would think, and with people I know, that it makes it complicated with dating because not everybody is attracted to non-binary people. It kind of whittles down the pool even smaller because,
Yeah. Let's see, what else did I have down here? I guess that kind of covers it, but let's see, what else? I did have something else I wanted to say, now I can't remember it.
Demi?
Yeah.
So with demisexuality, I like to describe it as how sexuality plays out, because with demisexuality, you can be any type of sexuality, and it's kind of just an addition to it. So with demisexuality, you don't experience initial attraction to a person. So you don't see something and you're like, hubba hubba.
Yeah.
You have to form a genuine attraction to someone or form a relationship with someone before you reach that level. So a lot of people consider it like, oh, so that's normal, but it really is like, I don't have a type necessarily.
Right.
It's, the person over the, which I think a lot of people fit into that without realizing it.
Right. It's the person, not necessarily the physicality.
Exactly. Yeah. But then at the same time, I am still specifically attracted to only certain genders.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and there was something I wanted to say that. So I saw that you had a post a few days ago where you said we want to apologize to people who knew me before the age of 28.
Yeah.
Because I had basically created a very toxic personality.
Yes.
And when I first met you, you were sort of extroverted, at least presented yourself as being extroverted and outgoing, but in reality, you're very introverted.
Yeah.
Was part of that sort of heightened version of yourself kind of trying to mask your queerness and make it acceptable?
And I think it was a combination of queerness and neurodivergence, because since then I've learned I'm neurodivergent. And so I think it was a combination of the two. It's also like extroversion. I was comfortable around people, so I was comfortable around you, so I would...
Right.
But yeah, I think I'm a nervous talker.
Yeah.
So I ramble and babble when I'm nervous. But yeah, I was definitely creating a persona for sure. And I'm more comfortable being more refined. And
right.
Yeah, I'm settled into my body and who I am at this point. And it's pretty great.
And it's hard for like anybody, regardless if you're straight, cisgender, queer,
exactly,
to actually get comfortable with yourself. But it's even harder if you're outside of the normal.
Exactly. Yeah. Therapy helps. Honestly, I think everybody should go to therapy, whether you think you need it or not. It teaches you some good coping skills.
Right. And this was the other thing I wanted to talk about, the whole idea of, oh, it's just a phase.
Yeah.
You will grow out of it. And to people who are really, because there's a lot of pushback right now against,
yeah. Especially with recent laws being
with
passed.
non-binary and transgender, and just be like, so what do you say to people that are just like, well, clearly this is just a phase? Well, it's obviously not a phase.
Yeah.
It's been
a thing
for more than 10 years for you.
Yeah. So we're going on 2 decades for me. We're pretty close. We're at like 18 years. So I like bringing that up to people because they're like, oh, it's just a phase. It's a TikTok thing. It's a Tumblr thing. And I'm like, actually, I came out before I even knew what MySpace was.
Yeah,
So
there you go.
yeah, before I had social media, I didn't, like I said, I didn't have representation. I finally had representation in the words to put how I felt. Because like among my friends, I was like, I don't know, I'm kind of a dude, kind of a chick. And my friends got it because queer people flock together, so like the community usually is you find each other, even the closeted ones, especially at that age.
And to this discussion of like, oh, like where's all this like non-binary transgender coming from? This is just coming out of nowhere all of a sudden. It's not really. And Ashley actually found, because we're kind of doing some spring cleaning because we might be moving and everything. So she found an old like childhood development book that she had in college, and it was published in like 15 years ago. And so we went through, and there was a transgender section.
That is really
like
cool.
having the definition of what transgender was, and it was accurate.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh wow, 15 years ago, here's this book about development.
Right. And I was aware of transgender before I was aware of non-binary. So I would watch documentaries and stuff, and there was a reality show I think called Trans USA that followed around trans college students. And so I was like, almost feels right, but not quite. And So,
but just finding this book that was 15 years old, and so this whole idea that a lot of people are pushing back about, oh, this is just something that happened in the last 5 years. It's like, no,
it's been around.
It's been around for a while.
Also, I think that a big part of it is people feel more safe. It's a safety in numbers thing, and now people are allowed to speak out about it, because when I first came out in the state of Maine, it was legal to deny housing, jobs, loans. Like, if they found out that you were queer, they can be like, we don't want you as an employee. And there was a good handful of them in my area that believed that. So now it's illegal to do that.
Yes.
And so more people feel comfortable.
Right.
But then, some aren't, considering where people are getting chased back into the closets in certain areas.
Yes. I will say this about that book, though. Ashley's like, oh, well, we didn't read this. So even though it was in the book,
of course, didn't cover it.
Didn't cover it.
Yeah, there's a lot of books like that where people brush over
we're just gonna, and it was only 2 pages in the whole book.
Of course, yeah.
But still, it was there.
But it's something.
It was there.
It's something.
Yeah, and it's just so funny, like growing up and like, even though I'm straight cisgender, I was still teased for being gay.
Of course, because you weren't normal.
Because I wasn't normal.
Yeah,
I didn't fit into a box, and so
I was made fun of for being gay before I realized I was gay.
Yeah.
Like everyone's like, you're gay, and I'm like, oh no. And so I would like try so hard, and I never went through the internalized homophobia thing where I was like pushing against gay people, but I definitely tried really hard to prove people wrong. I would list off like boy bands that my friends liked, and I'm like, I think Justin Timberlake's attractive.
Yeah, he's got a Brillo pad on his head.
I
that's
wanna, like,
that's
rub
cute,
his
right?
hair.
Yeah. And I did that whole thing too of like, well, everyone seems to think I'm gay. Am I gay? And but and that's okay.
I think that it's people don't realize how normal it is to question your gender and sexuality. There's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of straight people do that. They're like,
and that's okay. And and some people, because there's that sort of internalized homophobia, they start really hating themselves for even contemplating that question.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I feel bad for those people.
Yeah.
I really hope that they can reach the point in themselves where they're comfortable with themselves, because
Yeah.
I think that that's what everybody needs. The world would be a lot better place if everybody just did a little self-reflection.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate message, is just let people be who they want to be.
Yes.
Call people what they want to be called. It's not a big deal.
It's not going to hurt you. And, you know, it's funny because you can think of all these examples of where people use non-binary in a singular, or gender-neutral terms in a singular. Like, if someone cuts you off in traffic, that guy cut me off, or they cut me off in
Right.
traffic. If you don't know the gender of a dog, what's their name? Like,
Right. Yeah, and I've had that conversation with people, especially in terms of writing. It's like, oh, well, that's wrong. You can't do that. You have to have he or she, or you have to write he/she. You can't do that. That's grammatically incorrect. And I'm like, yeah, but people, just like you said, like, oh, they went down to the store, they will be right back. Like,
yeah,
people
exactly.
do that all the time.
All the time, yeah. So it's funny that once, it catches to that, and people will be like, I don't use pronouns.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, I love that. You know,
That's
my
one of my
pronoun
favorites.
is I love America. It's like, wait, no, that's not how it works.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I like to think that, you know, these people can be gotten through to. I've definitely, a lot of the time, it's really just ignorance, and you can get through to people. You just have to try to talk to them. And then if they double down and they're mean, then
you go.
they're not worth your time.
Yeah, you got to learn when to walk away.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that walking away, blocking, removing yourself from a situation is a big self-care method that
Yeah.
I am not good at.
Yeah.
I'm practicing.
Yeah, it's hard not to want to fight.
Yes.
And sometimes it is worthwhile, and you can have a breakthrough, and even just have like even a small concession of like, okay, I get where you're coming from.
Exactly.
But then there are the people who will just start like quoting scripture at you or
Yeah.
something like that, and it's like there's just
Yep.
you got to pick your battles.
Yep. And then I like to pull out the ones that back up what I'm saying. It's like, I was raised fundamentalist. I know my stuff.
Yeah, and that's always funny, like, because they think, you know, the Bible is theirs. So like, if somebody uses the Bible, it's like, wait a second, you can't do that.
No. And
you're a
there's-
heathen. You're going down.
And it's sad too, because I have so many friends who are queer and a part of the church, and there are churches that are becoming more and more accepting.
Yeah.
Like, if you go to Portland Pride, I cry every time, because there's just all these churches carrying things saying, we accept you and we're sorry, and gets me
Yeah.
choked up every time.
Yeah.
But it's cool that seeing so many more churches embracing and holding accountability for their past, and being like, you know, maybe we were wrong. And maybe God created everyone in his image, and, you know.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea.
Exactly,
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, do unto others and love everyone. And
Yeah, and the whole what would Jesus do? I'm pretty sure
that Jesus would be super cool.
I'm pretty sure Jesus wouldn't be like going on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and just flaming people for not being the way he thinks they should be.
I don't think Jesus would be leaving hate comments on Facebook.
I mean, that's a visual.
Yeah.
And he would be in a dress while he was doing it.
Yes, of course, yeah. I love it. There's this one drag queen, and I am blanking on their name right now, but they look, you know, the stereotypical look of Jesus,
Yeah.
and they'll wear like the outfits, and then like, just kidding, I'm in glam.
Okay, yeah, so we could probably keep talking for a while, but, well, you know, let's just wrap it out. So, yeah, thanks for coming and sharing your story, because
thank
I think
you
it's
for having
important.
me.
I think it's important, and sometimes it's scary. A lot of people aren't comfortable for sharing their story,
Yeah.
so thank you
For
doing that.
Yeah, I wanted to represent somebody that's been around for a hot second, especially for the youngsters, like all the kids that are coming out now, and be like, hey, I came out before you were born.
Yeah.
And so
And
you're
especially-
valid.
And especially with non-binary, because I feel like a lot of times that kind of gets lost in the mix.
Yeah, there is a lot of hate towards non-binary people, even in the queer community.
Yeah, it's sort of like a get off the fence sort of thing.
Exactly.
Like, choose
yeah,
what you are.
Exactly. Stop being selfish.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing where whenever it's either or, it's the same thing with pansexual and bisexual people as well.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that there's even like infighting within the queer community.
Yeah, it's a bummer, but
Yeah.
there's people are progressing though. I really do I think the Zoomers are going to come in and make the world a better place. I really do.
All right, great.
Awesome.
So yeah, thanks again for staying.
you.
Or well, thanks for coming, and yeah,